think about time, oh time, how time passes by. Do you still think about how time goes by? Do you, do you, do you, do you, do you, do you?
Modern society's sprawling urban hives seem to celebrate misguided goals. For me, the prevailing Western culture is too loud with nothing to say, too controlling and yet indifferent to individuals, too crowded and disconnected. It disregards the aesthetic beauty of the natural world. The competitiveness and money grubbing left me uninspired. My yin and yang need for solitude and for genuine human affection kept me at the fringe of the main pack of disaffected humanity. I returned to the herd warily, sometimes moving against the pack. If I found myself at this stage unsuited to a more sedentary landbound life, I at least knew the way out. A good little boat and the will to roam are all I require. In Tennyson's Ulysses, even though the old salt was portrayed at times as a crotchety SOB filled with pathos, its overall uplifting message of striving for life in the face of adversity captures the essence of the restless adventurer. Ulysses was unwilling to settle gracefully into old age. He longs for one more quest and exhorts his crew to embark on a final voyage. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine and opposed free hearts, free foreheads, you and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end. Some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. This is an excerpt from Home from Distant Seas by my friend and mentor, James Baldwin. It was written using his memoirs throughout his solo circumnavigating adventures. In 2016, James and I passaged from his home port, Brunswick, Georgia, to the Bahamas on his 28-foot sloop-rigged yacht, Adam. I would love to see the expression on James' face today, him knowing that I am here in Santa Catalina, Panama, on my 37-foot sloop-rigged yacht, Valhalla, and I am now in full swing of my own solo sailing adventures. Lord knows James had his doubts that I was going to follow through with my own plans. Here's to you, James. Thanks for your continued support.
To go for a sail. Got a heavy dew on everything. Kind of a cold night, huh?
I was cozy.
Good. Tools. This is the most important piece of gear right here. This is going to do all the steering offshore. The novice crew should take as many of these as they can stomach, or one is recommended. So this is a tilt-up outboard well I designed, so it can be tilted up when we're sailing, down temporarily for motoring. We've got a fair wind today, but this will help us get out of the slip. It's a noisy little beast, but it can be quite helpful. 6 horsepower. It's considered undersized for this size boat by most sailors. The more experience you have sailing, the less horsepower you need. Last bridge before entering the open sea. There's a metaphor for the freedom of the sea. So we've got a simple safety harness jackline system. We've got the harness on, hook into the jackline. It's long enough to reach the bow or the stern. There's one on the starboard side, I'll put one on the port side. Keep you with the boat. So I'm normally connected to my harness and jackline all the time when I'm on deck, unless it's flat calm. Because you never know when you're going to take a misstep. Especially now in the winter, cold water, you don't have much of a chance for long in the water. But if you got crew aboard, first thing someone should do is throw a throwable flotation as soon as they see somebody go in the water, and then stop the boat, and then bring the boat back around, deploy a swim ladder, bring them aboard. One of the nice things about a boat with low freeboard is easy to scramble back aboard if you go over. Whereas a bigger boat with higher freeboard, it's more dangerous. It's one of the myths about a large boat being safer than a small boat. A big boat has a lot of lethal components, or things that can injure you, and you just can't manhandle everything like you can on a small boat where the forces are smaller, as well as getting aboard the boat in an emergency. So we're passing out St. Simon Sound. Behind me is Jekyll Island. And the inlet to the ocean. That's right, before you were sailing, you did a long motorcycle trip through Central South America.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, I saw that excellent documentary video you made on your YouTube channel.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So that trip began and ended where?
I started in Los Angeles. I bought a little Yamaha, 1980 Yamaha. It was already 30 years old. And that little trusty bastard got me all the way down to Buenos Aires. It was a great little motorcycle. And I sold it, and that was the end of my motorcycling, you know, but the purpose was the trip. The purpose was just to transverse the road, you know, like I was loving it, you know.
Yeah, it showed in the video. So beautifully done.
Thank you.
It's kind of a spiritual journey as well as a road journey.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of healing going on in that trip for you. It's like going to sea is also a very healing experience. You can get away from your troubles and stresses on shore and you head out for some adventure.
Repeat.
If people see us, they're gonna make fun of us. They're like, these guys are jokes.
We need a third camera on us.
Yeah,
This
is reality.
Imagine that, right? If we had a third camera clamped on the rail, and we are back and forth, you're on, no, you're on. No, I said you're on first. Yeah, sailing can be a great healing experience for you. It's getting away from the stresses, problems you had on shore. To some extent, you bring your life with you wherever you go. But when you go to sea, there's something different about it. It's a very liberating, freeing, healing experience. You don't always know you need some healing, but after a few days offshore, you start to unwind and relax. You feel good. A cool morning in December, heading out St. Simon's Inlet with Ian here, making his film. We catch a fair wind, 3 days to the Bahamas from here. And we do have a fair wind to start with. The cold front has passed through. So the wind went from southwest yesterday through northwest, and tonight it's supposed to blow stronger from the north. And we'll head east and then turn southeast towards the Bahamas, across the Gulf Stream late tonight if the wind holds. And as the wind shifts to northeast, we'll be able to alter our course to the southeast and to the south.
Which, with your, do you have a blog?
Yeah, I've got my blog website, atomvoyages.com, which I've got a lot of my YouTube videos there. One of my books is there to read free online, and both books are on Amazon also. And so I've documented some of my passages and wrote articles for magazines or just for the blog and the website.
Will you upload your footage to your do you have a following there?
Well, I haven't paid attention to the subscribers to my, for example, my YouTube channel or my website. It's fairly popular though, because I get a lot of emails from people sailors and would-be sailors looking for advice. And we fit out small sailboats for voyaging here in Brunswick. My wife and I work together doing that. So a lot of people reach us through our website, and we help kind of get them ready and get their boats ready for sea. It helps if you have somebody with experience that can get you started. Otherwise, it's a pretty long learning curve to learn sailing and then learn how to sail a boat offshore. And you could do it all on your own like I did. It takes years before you could do it safely and competently. Sometimes you get lucky. Young people take off all the time, inexperienced. Most of them survive, but most of them don't make their envisioned destination or plans first time out. A lot of people head out from the East Coast planning on island hopping through the Bahamas and Caribbean, and it's their first cruise. They don't have a lot of experience. The boat isn't very well fitted out, maybe, and they start beating to windward through the Bahamas against the trade winds down the Caribbean, and they often turn back to Florida, sell the boat, or maybe refit and reorganize and head out again.
Wind vane's doing its job, though. I've got a couple of these mainsail up. That's good. Get for a while and I have to go down below.
In this 1987 footage, James heads out from the East Coast, sailing Atom through Bahamas and Caribbean, destination Panama. This passage is the first leg of his second circumnavigation. Reminiscing back about this very voyage from his book, Bound for Distant Seas, James writes, I was 28 years old and had recently returned home to Florida from a solo 2-year circumnavigation, only to find myself unhappy at the prospect of remaining ashore in the United States. I sorely missed the excitement, the challenge, and the simple joys I'd known. I had circled the world under sail once. I had not yet seen nearly enough of it and knew there remained many mysteries out there to discover. The obvious and strange thing about circumnavigating is that I ran as far from home as it was possible to go, and yet the journey brought me right back to where I'd started, at least in the physical sense. A further incentive to go back again, if there really was one needed, was finding that back home the stagnant American economy held limited job opportunities. I still possessed a fierce need to be my own master, which left me less employable than before.
Lunchtime. Just made some cornmeal. Got a huge crop of sprouts. Put on my sandwich. Mung bean sprouts. Represents 4 days of sprouting. First day, second, third, and fourth. Quite huge.
At this point in time, in 1987, as James disembarks from the East Coast, he is 28 and I am 7 years old, and I am living in Los Angeles, California. Here is LeMay Street Elementary School, where I attended 2nd grade. Disobedient and difficult to educate for my teachers, I was a troubled child from a troubled home. As I chafed against my school indoctrination and the unpleasantness at home, even at that young age, I wanted nothing more than to escape. In James' books, he wrote about the paradox of running away to the sea. to circumnavigate, to arrive back at your starting place, renewed in spirit. He wrote, "The sameness of the city brought within me an impression of closing a circle, of coming back in more than a literal sense to the same place it all began. To circumnavigate the world is not important. Many a solo sailor have made perfectly pointless circumnavigations. It's how you live and sail that gives it meaning." The voyage had been full of promise until the goal was realized. Strangely, the fulfillment was tinged with betrayal. My distant oceans had been crossed and my mountains climbed. To arrive is the end of a journey, not its purpose. There would be another voyage, a return to those blue highways, I told myself. In the many years since, I have rolled down the seas, seeking something beyond the horizon. At whatever age you begin your voyage, I hope you take with you that young person you remember yourself as, on the voyage of the rest of your life. Meanwhile, here in 2016, at the close of our first day out from Brunswick, Georgia, the winter air is cool and the wind is fair. The star-filled night and building winds promise a speedy passage. Our route takes us directly across the infamous Gulf Stream and then south to warmer latitudes, aiming for the Bahamas 350 miles ahead. Our shared journey, where the old salt initiates a green crew, has begun. I am consumed with an obsession to sail, to get away from Los Angeles. Many nights I go to Marina del Rey and look from behind the chain-link fences that keep trespassers out of the exclusive docks, where only members are allowed. This obsession eats me away. Everything I do, even the simplest tasks, in my mind get me closer to leaving on my circumnavigation. In my head I think, I'm going to the bank today because it is a small but necessary errand that separates me from my goal. In my mind I think, I will get up this morning and get through the day, because that too is a necessary accomplishment that stands in the way between me and my envisioned life's destination. I couldn't understand, and still don't, how people could chain themselves to a house, a job, a bank loan, and a discontented spouse when they are still young enough and uncorrupted enough to appreciate the wonders in this wide open world. Prisons come in many different guises, and the largest are filled to capacity by the self-committed.
In my early years sailing, I always had crew with me, and so the first passage offshore, I had a hometown buddy from Detroit area, sailed with me. We were heading from Detroit to the West Indies, and we went from New York City offshore for 7 or 8 days to Bermuda. And he never got his sea legs, unfortunately. We had some rough seas, worse than now, really rough for most of the trip. And he didn't eat anything or drink anything the entire time that I noticed. I don't know how he survived. He was really miserable. I was worried about him. And as soon as we got into Bermuda, though, he made an instant recovery. I started cooking up a meal. He snatched a bowl and fork, held it up, wolfed it down, fully recovered. He grabbed his passport, ran off to the travel agent, and bought a ticket home, came back and told me, sorry James, I kind of missed my girlfriend. I'm leaving. Understandable. And so there I was in Bermuda with no crew. So I put a sign in the rigging, sailing to West Indies, crew needed, share expenses. And it was in the tourist area of St. George's, Bermuda, at the docks there. And tourists went by and kind of chuckled at it, but no serious takers. Until the last day before I was going to leave, got a rap on the hull one morning early. I came up, a guy was standing there and on deck handed me my sign and said, I'm your man, John Clark from Manchester. So he was vacationing English tourist there in Bermuda. And so he joined me and we sailed for the next, I think, 6 weeks, all through the West Indies. We went non-stop to Tobago Island near Trinidad from Bermuda. That was about 10 or 14-day trip. And he was seasick the first few days. Got his sea legs though eventually. But typical traditional British attitude, very stoic. Yeah, he would be seasick and eat my meal, step outside, excuse himself, vomit into the sea. I'd ask him, how you feeling? So, oh, much better now, thank you. So, and the next day, same thing. After about 3 days, he had his sea legs and he was good. So we traveled all through Caribbean islands, and that was the first time that I started walking across the islands with my backpack, and we climbed up to some volcanoes there and explored. And he was into that too, and that kind of got me hooked on that. So this is one of my better crew experiences. Been walking for several hours down this road on my way across the island. Passed through one village, about 30 people, just a few buildings and a little trade store and a church. Mostly it's been raining, but it's better than walking in the sun. This island lies just about on the equator. It's very hot, so it's starting to cool down a bit, so I'm getting some elevation.
By choice, I sailed the world alone, walking across each island that crossed my bow, and climbing every penitentially steep mountain within reach. In the mountains, I looked for more than a hike and a view. I expected some solace to the soul, if not redemption for past mistakes. Once again, I felt the burden of a backpack that pulls at the shoulders, strains the back, and teaches the legs the awful power of gravity. There is something about the hard physical effort to gain a summit that restores the spirit of a man. And being alone, no one can dilute the experience.
This crater is called Los Camelos, and the road I was walking on is nearby to the left, and on the other side of the road is another crater like this one, so the road goes between the two. I've had this little sailboat for 38 years now, and bought it in Detroit when I was 21 years old, and didn't know anything about sailing. I just graduated from a little sailing dinghy to this boat, and planned to sail it as long and as far as I could. But at first I didn't expect to do a circumnavigation, but it was in the back of my mind. I had read some adventure narratives of sailors who'd gone around the world, and so I knew it was possible. Didn't know if it was possible for me, not knowing anything about sailing, not having any money, not even knowing any other sailors. But I picked it up bit by bit, did some trips from the Great Lakes down to the Bahamas, then further into the Caribbean, back to Detroit to work in welding shops, earn some money to escape, and then after 5 years of that, working for a year, sailing for a year, back and forth, then I set out, only had $500 left. I set out in 1984 to sail alone around the world. And it was a 2-year trip. I only had 13 stops on the entire voyage, partly as a way to economize, because on shore is where you spend your money. I didn't have any. And partly as a way to enjoy a challenging series of long voyages, long passages offshore. Sometimes longest was 43 days alone at sea, and it was really great to rejoin society after a long passage, and it was great to get away again, and one adventure followed another. I got back 2 years later to Fort Lauderdale, where I began, and within 10 months I was off again. And on the second trip I removed the inboard engine that I hadn't needed and had a sculling oar with me for calm waters, and sailed engineless from Florida through the Panama Canal to China, and cruised through Southeast Asia for 8 years, lived and worked there. And then had crew join me. Then I had various crew come and go. After that, I had sailed alone enough for a while. And then after some 13 years, ended up back here on the East Coast of the U.S. And we eventually settled down in Brunswick, Georgia. We still do delivery trips occasionally down the Caribbean, across the Atlantic, or take people out sailing, go for local trips ourselves, and refit a lot of boats in the meantime here, get other people launched on their voyages.
In 2014, I was 34 years old, a young man with an old man's cynicism, still living in Los Angeles and still looking for a way out. I carried a load of angry childhood memories, a distrust of authority, and a sense of meaninglessness of pursuing the American dream. My negativism had me in mental knots. Stuck in traffic on the 405 freeway made me crazy. I couldn't understand what the hell we're all doing here, fighting for space on this ribbon of concrete, sucking in smog and cursing at each other while we fought our way to hated jobs in order to carry on our harried lifestyles of expensive cars, oversized houses, and mind-numbing social routines. My chief roadblock to escaping this mess away was my perceived financial and social obligations. I resented that dependence and wanted to find a way to set myself free, to be somewhere out there on the sea, exploring the world, romancing exotic women, and toasting to my triumphant rebellion.
Wind's picking up a bit, so I'm going to put a reef in the main by going up, lowering the halyard, then pulling in the first reefing line and securing the sail down at both corners of the tack and the clew, and then rehoist it. Got 3 knots for the third reef line, 2 for the second, 1 for the first. They're also color coded. When you're sailing downwind, there's a lot of pressure in the sail, so they need the winch.
James stands looking out off the starboard deck from Atom. He braces the shroud stay in his hands for support. He feels the stainless steel wires in his hands, a feeling so familiar that it is simply instinctual. His boat, for 35 years, they have burrowed new paths together. From this starboard vantage point, on a passage across the Pacific Ocean, making landfall in the Galapagos Islands, James, 28 years old and full of youthful inspiration, observes again his surroundings. The memories flood.
Just past an island over there, small one. But this one is almost 3,000 feet high. A volcano at the center.
As a young man, James, living in Detroit, Michigan, was faced with his particular set of walled-in circumstances. Opportunities were available for him, such as welding in the automotive industry, but that wasn't enough. From his vantage point, his American story was grim and unpromising, eventually leading him through the necessary steps to make a clean break from his former living situation. In his book, Bound for Distant Seas, he gives insight to his perceived worldview as a contributing member of his country. The lawmakers believe that anything in the best interest of the people must be enshrined in law, that we common folk must be protected from every possible hazard in life. Freedom and wilderness ashore are racing each other to extinction. At sea, you can still find a fleeting taste of both, but move quickly before the government-fed parasites have taxed the wind in your sails, re-educated you to think as they do, legislated your thoughts as well as your movements, and gained control over your very destiny. Although we cannot survive in a state of anarchy, a sailor knows we must have a taste of freedom from time to time to truly live.
Yeah, I was inspired reading as a teenager books like Sailing Alone Around the World by Joshua Slocum, a classic, first person to do it. And then there was Dove, Robin Lee Graham, the youngest sailor to solo circumnavigate. Eventually made a movie out of that book called Dove. And he started out when he was 16 years old in Hawaii. A lot of support from his parents, and returned home when he was 21. And that was a big deal back then in the 60s and early 70s. Nowadays there's even younger sailors going out there to break records. I've never been interested in breaking records myself, but I can see the desire there.
By this stage in our passage, things are progressing along nicely. We've made good distance across the Gulf Stream. We've got to chum it up. I've heard what inspired James to go sailing and the details of his early travels. The sailing has been pleasantly idyllic. In a moment of inner reflection and premature bravery, I think to myself, gosh, I can do this. The soft colors in the picturesque sky radiate a sense of encouragement, reinforcing my lofty thoughts. Meanwhile, the storm brewing off Canadian waters in the north forecasts strong winds in our direction, bringing with it a looming reality face slap. As we reached the Gulf Stream, the winds increased and kicked up the sea. James' 28-foot boat Atom moves aggressively under the press of sails, and her motion is lively, too lively for me to adjust to so quickly. Seasickness sent me to my bunk. It seems I did not fully realize the severity of this roller coaster ride. My naive expectations of how I wanted it to be unraveled my belief in my sailing plans. It seems that reading books on sailing is not one bit as informative as one day actually under sail. I also saw that James was a man of great endurance and able to subject himself to the extended discipline and sacrifice of comfort on a small boat at sea. My pitiful state made me wonder if I could, or if I even wanted, to do the same.
How are you feeling this morning?
Tired, but otherwise good. Not much sleep last night with all the chaos and sail handling going on in the rough sea. Pre-packaged serving of oats and muesli, milk powder, cinnamon. Just pour warm water into it, let it sit a few minutes. You want to try your tea or let it cool down?
Let it cool for a second. Thank you. Did you get any sleep last night?
Not much. Had to keep jumping up to reef sails, or the whisker pole came loose, started banging around, had to deal with that at 3 o'clock. And a bolt vibrated loose in the wind vane, lost steering, so rushed out to take care of that. Everything's back in order now, but not much sleep last night. Getting used to the rough seas slamming the boat around. And I've got the windward bunk on this trip, so when you're alone you can shift from the windward side to the leeward side, get a little more comfort. Ready for another? The care and feeding of the offshore crew. We're hand feeding our film crew this morning after a rough night. Crackers and cheese.
A slight chance of showers in the evening. Widespread fog after midnight.
I want to give a shout out to my sponsors.
Northeast winds around 5
I want
miles
to
per hour.
throw out a big thanks to Huggies and
Chance of rain
Depends.
20%. Monday.
getting me through this.
Highs in the lower 80s. South winds around 5 miles per hour.
Yeah, you've had a bit of a rough inauguration here at sea.
I want to say one love to Pampers for getting me through the saga. Keeping things right.
You spent a lot of time in your bunk.
When I was down low.
I have to admit that. A lot of time in your bunk with the bucket tethered close by.
I just want to shout out. I want to say big thanks to my supporters. Rubbermaid.
The sea is a challenging environment, and I've had friends that have left on passages and never returned, lost at sea. Happens occasionally. When I was in South Africa on my first circumnavigation, I had a sailing friend who was anchored next to me there, and he had built his own 50-foot ferro cement sailboat and had sailed it more than halfway around the world. He was in South Africa, and he got a local girl as crew, and she wanted to emigrate to Australia. So he said he would take her, and they set off from Durban on the Indian Ocean coast of South Africa for that high latitude stormy passage to Australia. And at the time, we both had SSB transceiver radios on board, so we kept in touch every day with the radio schedule. And all went well for about 10 days as he got further out into the South Indian Ocean, in the 45 degrees south latitude, stormy area. And he was at least 1,500 miles out into the ocean. And on one of our daily radio chats, he said, "We're in a huge storm out here, the biggest one I've ever seen. And it's very difficult to manage the boat in the weather." And so, well, he was a competent sailor and had a big boat, and we kind of expected he'd be all right. The next day on our radio schedule, silence. The next day again, silence. Never heard from him again. And I was relaying his messages back to his father, who was also on amateur radio back in Florida, because he wasn't getting a good signal from the boat. And so I had to tell him that I'd lost contact with him. And so his father, what should we do? But you can't just start a search in the middle of the entire ocean somewhere. So all I could say was, well, let's hope that maybe the boat was partially disabled and they're able to jury rig the boat and make it into port eventually somewhere, and you'll hear from him. I said you can alert the authorities in the various countries around the area, but so I told his father, if you don't hear from him in a month or two, then they probably went down in that storm. Maybe a rogue wave turned him over, broke the boat open, and sank. It's hard to know what happened, but they disappeared at sea, and that was sad.
Back in 1987, as James sails across the Pacific, some 3,400 empty miles nonstop from his Hawaiian departure, Atom's keel floats above the deepest waters on Earth, the Mariana Trench. Deeper by far than Mount Everest is tall. In this lonely part of the Western Pacific, he makes landfall at Saipan Island, in the northern Marianas Island group. As on other islands before, James goes ashore with his backpack to walk across the island, finding this tropical island filled with the scars and ghosts of a titanic struggle between U.S. forces against Japan's Empire of the Sun in World War II. He sleeps in a bombed-out cave that had been a Japanese command post and looks out over the infamous Bonsai Cliffs, where hundreds of civilian men, women, and children leapt to their deaths rather than surrender, honoring the fatalistic Bushido Code, where conquered people were considered unworthy of life, even if they were the conquered people themselves.
Very angry surf rolling up underneath Bonsai Cliff. the memorial, Japanese memorial. And just beyond this field is Banzai Cliff, where the civilian Japanese lined up, the father lined up his family, youngest child first, then older children, then his wife, and then himself, and they jumped off.
The history of mankind is filled with triumph and tragedy, reflecting on the rewards and intrinsic dangers of solo sailing around the world to fulfill the need to explore, James writes. Sailors relish the challenges and adventures of travel through the vastness of oceans. Directed solely by the great circulation of winds and our own desires. A well-planned voyage will contain some blissful days of warm winds at your back and an open pathway ahead. But it is not always that easy. There is also the strain of sleepless nights during bad weather and reef-studded waters. The physical toll of bouncing through the rough seas and always the chance of mishap, even death on the indifferent sea. That is the yin and yang of voyaging, a fine balance with all its varied elements in coexistence.
People worry about those rogue waves like the ones that almost sank my friend Henry and probably did sink my other friend who was lost in the Indian Ocean on his boat. But a rogue wave's a pretty rare event, and they come in different sizes. You know, the average sea, like today, is running 6-foot seas. Every now and then, every 1,000 or 5,000th wave coincides with another wave train, and you'll get maybe a 12-foot sea on a day like today, which can really surprise you. But you can imagine if you're in a storm and you've got 20-foot seas running, and you have the misfortune to encounter a rogue wave in that event, well, that could turn your boat upside down and pitch pole you end over end, sink you outright, lose your mast. Anything could happen. But it's very rare, especially if you use good passage planning, and I never encountered anything like that on all my trips. Nothing really threatening beyond a 20-foot minor rogue wave that broke the tiller, turned the boat sideways onto the waves, and dipped the leeward spreader in the sea. So here's where we're approaching the Little Bahama Bank to try and go in and anchor off Grand Key. But the winds had forecast to be moderate from the east to the southeast by the time we got here, which would make that accessible. But now we're only 25 miles away, and the wind is blowing strong from the northeast. So we may not be able to enter the bank here. Might be too dangerous, in which case the wind doesn't lighten up and shift by morning. We'll have to abandon it and sail on out and go to a port in Florida. So you got to be flexible in your plans, work with the wind you got.
25 miles away from Grand Key, our destination Anchorage, James studies his maps and checks the forecasted conditions. From his observations, he is concerned and expresses doubt for our safe arrival attempt. His protocol, long developed from years of voyaging, is an ingrained belief of conservative judgment, learned by his appreciation for the sea's beauty, in balance with the respect of her awesome power. An excerpt detailing his personal connection is as follows. I kept returning to the sea because I was still in love with her. I longed for the outlandishly painted sunsets and silvery moonrises over open horizons, the blissful calms and terrifying tempests, to dance with the waves under a big sky, the joyous arrivals and even the sad goodbyes. I loved the sea, despite her unforgiving tendency to punish the unprepared. My waking dreams express the magnificence of female beauty as surreal sculpture. The brilliance of her eyes and skin shines glorious. My love burns hot as hell and is punished as an immutable sin. My love is criminal. It is blasphemy. It is forever.
Sunsets often remind me of a girl back there, a reminder as ethereal as the fragrance of flowers wafting in the open hatch above my bunk. I wondered, as time passed, did she also feel nostalgic about me? Did a sail on her horizon ever cause her a second wistful look?
Well, days of glorious sailing. A little rough. Calmer days ahead, I'm sure. About halfway to the Bahamas now. Riding this cold front. The wind's going northeast. We're heading southeast and soon to turn south. Final approach. We may arrive at the islands and reefs in the darkness tomorrow night, so we'll have to slow down or heave to before we get in there too close, if the wind holds.
As we approach the Bahamas, James readies himself for something he's been planning to do for the past few years, since his mother Helen passed away. He also has some healing to do, as he expresses in his book, Bound for Distant Seas, where he writes about his emotions as a son to his mother and the role she played in his journey. I convinced myself that no one really needed me back home, though that wasn't completely true. My recently divorced mother probably felt differently about my hurried departure to begin an open-ended second circumnavigation only a few months at home. I was her only child. She never spoke of her needs, and I was too self-absorbed to ask. She understood my compulsion to follow rainbows and seek the poetry of life, just as she had done in her youth, and she outwardly encouraged me to undertake this voyage because she knew it was what I had to do. My life has been wonderful, my mother told me as I gripped her hand on her deathbed. You're here now, and I'm at peace to know we'll go through this together. I had finally returned like the prodigal son to be at her side for her last days, to put both our souls to rest. I finally realized I was also there to seek forgiveness and complete my own cycle of redemption. In a short time, I understood I cried not over the inevitable cycle of life and death, but from the suddenly awakened guilt of a wayward son brought to death's confessional. There is always a toll to pay on freedom's road.
One of the things I came out here for on this trip was to release my mother's ashes into the Gulf Stream. Journey well, Mom, and rest easy.
It was time to release my mother's ashes into the sea. She had loved to sail with me on short passages in earlier years. Now we took our final passage together. Leaning over the lee rail, I poured the contents into the sea with a trembling hand and a full heart. The swirling wind brought a mist of ash into my eyes and lungs as I laid her to rest on the edge of the Gulf Stream. As the water carried her away in the endless cycle of Atlantic currents, the good memories flooded back to me. I was thankful and at peace.
Here I was in Munich with my then German girlfriend and her family. They claimed to be a sailing family. I knew the parents didn't support our relationship, and I saw it was doomed to fail. At our final dinner with the family, I made a dramatic toast, announcing my pledge to solo sail around the world as a tribute to these judgmental land-bound sailors. They coldly brushed me off, no doubt thinking, no way in hell. I wonder how much my bloody-minded grievances against the world fueled my determination to sail away. My brain cried out for freedom. Reading James' books, dripping in nostalgic patina and romantic prose, and his succinct anti-Western work ethic sentiment added fuel to my fire. Looking back, it seems I was only seeing my own story in his words, rather than the true James, who I came to see, is more positive in his outlook than my intentions wanted him to be. In a way, I was looking for a hero to help me blast my demons to bits. Erasing myself from the center of the universe, I see that my anger and pain lie within me, and the once perceived toxic forces around me are merely my own projections. I have the nervous habit of checking the gauges of my Westerbeke engine the way James would scan the horizon for squalls. Although having a diesel engine gives me some comfort, I've been relying on her too much. I know James would scoff at how motoring any time the sailing is tough, because it robs you of the pure sailing experience and hinders learning seamanship skills. The readout on the radar gives me a digital representation of Baja Mexico coastline. Radar's usefulness as an aid to navigation and for collision avoidance, and its ability to track thunderstorms, is weighed against their power drain and chance of breaking down. And James has warned me not to become a gadget sailor that can't directly interpret the world around them. Nacho and Lucas sleep to the drum of the engine while the electronic autopilot steers. Mainsail is raised to steady boat and take advantage of slight winds. My trusty dinghy hangs on for a ride as the untested boat and crew push forward. Note to self, don't tow dinghy in unprotected waters again. I embrace the living nature around me as I take in the awesome landscape of the Sierra San Pedro Martir mountain ranges. We head for Punta Canoa anchorage tonight. Entering Punta Canoa from the open sea is a surreal experience. Being here reminds me that this truly is the beginning of something big in my life. Anchored just off the arroyo, coastal birds fly in circle, awaiting Panga fishermen's evening return home with daily catch. I look out from the cliff line to the empty sea, knowing that there is so much more to come.
So we're gonna miss it or what?
Looks like we may have to give it a miss. This narrow channel is only about 10 feet deep at the deepest point, and we've got 6 to 8 foot waves rolling into it, and so it could be breakers right across the entrance. We wouldn't be able to get in.
So what's our ultimate plan now?
Well, there's no other islands to leeward of this except to end up in Florida, so if we don't hang out here all night waiting for a wind shift tomorrow that might come, then we could just turn downwind and run back to a port in Florida, get a rest over there.
At this point in our passage, our plans as well as my expectations have fallen apart. The rebellious waves that carried me away from sedentary life in the city have come crashing down against the reefs of raw nature. Lofty agendas and land-bound dilemmas now take a back seat to the basic duties of the sailor, where practical choices are made to ensure safe passage. The envisioned paradise in our future, as well as settling scores with the past, are erased from my mind. The voyaging sailor has a present and single-minded goal: to sail through troubled waters, cleansing away useless thoughts unrelated to direct matters at hand. Suddenly, our problems are no longer trivial, but rather elemental. A simple observation looking out over the bow to scan the horizon holds urgency. Plotting a logical course around storms and following the basic principles of passage planning become as automatic and as essential as breathing air into our lungs. That particular island of our dreams that would welcome us to its protected shores and heal our wounds no longer exists in our heads at all. It remains but is no longer ours. Just as finding your way home, there are worthy islands at all points of the compass that will serve our purpose. Atom's bow was now heading towards a new landfall, closer to home.
After 4 days of mostly free reefs in the mainsail, 4 windy days, blowing 20 to 25 knots all the time, it's starting to lighten up. We're going to shake out that third reef, put the second reef in. Red line here is the third reef line. Release that. Lower the halyard some. Standard slab reefing system. Get this tack ring off the hook. Pressure of the wind holding the sail up a little bit. Reefing downwind like this, you got the sail pressed in against the rigging and the mast, but with this strong track system, it's low friction, it works pretty well. You don't have to turn up wind for it. Now we'll secure the second reef line. 2 knots here, the blue line. Rehoist the halyards. Making sure nothing's run off the road. Nice about a battenless mainsail, you don't have battens to hang up. The halyard snug. Now we're on our final approach to St. Mary's Inlet between Florida and Georgia. About 15 miles ahead. Last night our southeast wind went south and then light and calm, and we motored a few hours, and then just an hour ago a very light southwest wind sprung up, so we got full sail up and moving along about 4 knots, kind of sedately in the calm water, just a leftover swell running. Pretty easy ride with no wind waves yet. This is one of the nicest times to sail offshore. It's when the old wind has died, that it's generated all that rough water, and the sea's had a chance to calm down a bit, and a new wind has just popped up. And now you're sailing along in nearly flat water before the new wind has a chance to kick up new waves.
Although we initially set sail for the Bahama Islands, as we approached it became evident to our cautious navigator James that the high waves generated by several days of strong winds would make our intended landfall at a narrow, shallow channel to the little Bahama bank a risky choice. Since we were out for the passage more than the destination and had not scheduled extra time to sail on to a safer inlet to the Bahamas, we diverted to another favorite island of James called Cumberland Island on the border between Florida and Georgia. In contrast to the perfectly clear waters and colorful coral reefs of the Bahamas, Cumberland Island is a densely wooded nature reserve bordered on its western shore by a muddy, serpentine river and impenetrable marshlands. A shore picturesque hanging Spanish moss decorates the twisted oak canopy overhead. Although it was not the paradise we envisioned en route to Bahamas, it was just as captivating in its own way. Our travels had turned into an unplanned adventure that in a way represented my personal quest for change. I hope to be open for what is to come and not stubbornly latch on to some image of freedom that I picked out as a destination off of a map or from the experience of another traveler from written words in a book. I now see it was my resiliency that gave me the strength to embrace my sailing plans and an adaptive quality I try to continue to apply to my adventures today. Valhalla has rounded Baja California Peninsula and entered the broad waters of Sea of Cortez. We sail softly in aquamarine colored waters into Bahia de las Animas. I operate our windlass and deploy the ground tackle. I then tie a rolling hitch snubber line around our 3/8 inch chain and secure the lines properly. We dinghy to shore.
I get you.
My buddies and I stretch out our legs and then decide to hike to the canyon top and enjoy the view.
Anchored in the creek off Plum Orchard. We're at the restored Carnegie Mansion grounds here, called Plum Orchard, Cumberland Island. And you'll like this one, just down the road a piece, Yankee Paradise. And right next to it, it says water. In parentheses, sulfur. I think we should go that way. Just admiring this unlikely pair here of bald cypress growing up in between this really twisted limbed live oak, going out everywhere all at once with moss hanging off it. It's really a beautiful scene here. It's got this bald cypress tree growing up through in the middle of an embrace of this sprawling live oak with its branches twisted around all of its neighbors, moss dripping off the limbs. It's like a Jurassic scene, huh?
Cumberland Island, a body of land surrounded by water, like any island, stands against the sea as we do, weathering the storms just as we stand for a time against life's erosion. Here, the misfortune of a previous missed landfall is accepted. A new door has opened. The ability to envision oneself independently of our schemes is the first step to arrival. The next step is the ability to adapt to the reality of our situation of being in a place as indifferent to our plans and desires as the sea is. We evolve into a future beyond our knowing. The island, as our life, has a beauty that frightens, delights, and enlightens. Mother Nature's cycle of life. The ultimate creator, the ultimate adapter, the ultimate destroyer.
Walking through the forest, I think back about my friend Karawa in New Guinea, who I befriended when I was in the city working at a boatyard there, and he had just come down from the mountains where his tribe was living and looking for work in the city. Gave him a job there helping me to fit out a boat, and when we finished our work he invited me back to his village up in the Western Highland province, deep in the center of New Guinea. And that was really a great experience, walking clear across New Guinea up into the mountains way beyond the tourist zones, and living with people in a state I hadn't known still existed. And it was a hard life up there, in the grass huts and infertile soil. They grew sweet potatoes and almost nothing else except what they gathered from the forest. So it was pretty basic, hard living up in the mountains. Came down with malaria there. He took care of me. I was sick up there in the hut and delirious and in and out of consciousness for several days. And finally he and some other friends of his from the village carried me down that mountain, held me in an icy stream on the way down to break my fever, and then got me into the regional hospital up there and started to recover. But a lot of good memories of Karawa. Good friend. Good guy to have on the trail with you.
For the remainder of our day visit on Cumberland Island, James and I explore further on. We come across this swamp that reminds James of his time spent in Papua New Guinea, crossing knee-deep muck rivers. We also come across an old shed with a blown-out roof that is also reminiscent. And we decide to get back to Atum before it gets too late. We observe the locals in their boats. James demonstrates his fiberglass dinghy rowing technique. These are the type of dinghies he prefers over inflatables because of their tried and true reliability. And as the evening wears on, we enjoy the soft colors in the Georgia sky and the sunset, and we get comfortable on Atum and have a little chat before bedtime.
Now this is a book about a voyage I would like to make. A bad-mannered Englishman sailing around the British Isles, disgusted by everything he sees and everyone he sees. I'd like to make that trip.
Do you just want to tear people to shreds?
No, I don't want to write the trip the way he wrote it. I'd like to make the trip, but it's just funny to read this guy's bad attitude and his unending tirade against everything British, including himself.
Mm-hmm.
He's a transplanted British American who went back to England to sail around the British Isles. Jonathan Raban, brilliant writer, beautiful prose, and just sarcastic as hell.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit like me in that way, but he overdoes it, which I would never do.
Yeah, he gets away with it too, right?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
I want to rip people to pieces and get away with it and still get the higher road on it.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. Like you mentioned in my book, where I did rip into just a few people. Something I don't like to do, but it's to balance out your story. That's how life was out there, right? I mean, some people rub you so strongly the wrong way. It needs telling sometimes, but yeah, we don't want to dwell on the negative, the dark aspects of everything, because that's not what I hope to be about anyway, right?
What do you hope to be this documentary?
I want to be inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
I want people to feel inspired to get off their couch, put their smart devices away,
Mm-hmm.
and know that they can go out and have an authentic experience with nature, with the sea, whatever they choose. They don't have to sail a small boat across the ocean. That's been done to death. If that's their thing, it's a great way to go. I know that, but I mean, you just need to get out in the world, and that's what I would hope that your documentary here just brings something into their lives to make them think, okay, I need to make a little change too. He made a big change in his life and went out and did something. And, a lot of people have hunger for something. They don't know what it is. So maybe it would spark some interest in small boat voyaging, which would be great.
How do you...
Like this guy does in his books. Like I try to do in mine,
Different horses for different courses.
Yeah. Well, my books, his was all about sailing here and about his criticisms of the English. But besides inspiring people to maybe get out and have an adventure of their own, I hope to, like in my books, I hope to have a worthwhile entertainment at least.
Coming home provoked a dormant urge within me to create something of substance one day. Something that lasts, that transports the physical body as it transports the soul in a metaphysical sense. In a way, I had that vessel already. A boat should long outlive her creator if he builds with care and she is maintained by her string of owners. An average boat of sound design and good bones, improved by a modicum of skill at making it more seaworthy, as Atom has demonstrated, can provide a home, as well as a vessel for travel and dream fulfillment. A voyage will not earn you absolution, and it might just reveal you as a fool, but it may also make you feel heroic and ennobled.
Coast waters forecast for Altamaha Sound to Flagler Beach, out 20 nautical miles. Today, west-northwest winds 5 to 10 knots. Seas 2 to 3 feet. Dominant period 8 seconds. Inland waters a light chop. A chance of showers. Tonight, northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. Seas 2 to 3 feet. Dominant period 8 seconds. Inland waters a light chop. A chance of showers through the night. Thursday, north winds 15 to 20 knots. Seas 3 to 5 feet with occasional seas up to 6 feet.
Sailor reads his chart for the morning like his morning newspaper. What lies ahead?
heading out the river here from last night's anchorage into this larger river now, and then we're going to head out into St. Andrews Sound, which has got an inlet to the ocean. So we're going to go out just a half mile into the ocean and then back in the Intracoastal Waterway inside Jekyll Island, back up to Brunswick. 20 miles today, mostly inland waters.
We return to Brunswick, Georgia, to James' home where he lives with his wife May, whom he met in Taiwan during his voyage to Asia. Years later, in 2001, she decided to join him on his boat in Trinidad, where they were married. Since then, they've traveled through the Caribbean islands and several times across the Atlantic, as far as the Canary Islands and Brazil. Eventually, they decided to settle down here in Georgia in their small house, where they work as a team to build a workshop and boat sheds in the backyard, where they transform small sailboats like Atom into seaworthy and comfortable little voyaging boats for their clients. With the experience gained from 2 circumnavigations and a boat building apprenticeship in the yacht factories of Asia, James has the passion and unique ability to competently craft his client's boat into simple and capable vessels. Their friends and clients are bonded by their shared perspective that a well-found little boat is a tool to open up the world with the transformative experience of life under sail. Having James on my side in this adventure has been a source of stability and an understanding ear. We both come from broken homes and have survived the fallout from that. We both took control to find our way out, seeing boat travel as the unique key. I needed a strong person like him, and something of a father figure too. Someone who can listen and be empathetic to my situation, and struggles unlike my own absent dad. I know James had similar problems with his own father. In Bound for Distant Seas, he wrote, 20 years later, when age had mellowed both our tempers, I finally forgave my father for his abuse, despite his belief that no forgiveness was needed. An apology, however sweet to the ear, only robs forgiveness of its power. Just as the sea accepts all rivers no matter how polluted or foul, who was I to build a dam against him? From him I learned about tools and the mechanical world, the way a child soaks up a foreign language, and the skills I acquired from my father at an early age are still with me today. I am my father's son in the practical sense, if not morally. Separating the truth of the flawed man from the myth in a child's mind eventually brought an acceptance of things that cannot be changed. 700 miles into passage from Mexico to Panama, ominous clouds fill the sky. On my radar, I can see a visual reading of dense cloud formation roughly 18 miles long, heading our way. I put a few reefs in the main and jib and tightened down the sheets. It's our first storm. We got a free shower! Free shower! 35-knot winds shake the rig, which moans in response. Valhalla's bow plows mightily through the Pacific. Valhalla's bow moves headlong through the cloudy horizon.
Yes, a little inverter TIG. Not much bigger than a shoebox, but that'll do TIG welding, either 220 volt or 110 volt. You can do it with a large tank in a shop or a portable tank down at the marina or on a job site. Argon gas shield, tungsten non-consumable electrode, and then you have stainless welding wire here. Although I was trained as a welder in arc welding and MIG and all the other forms, TIG is what you want to use for stainless steel whenever possible. TIG doesn't splatter or smoke, make a mess, and it makes a stronger weld. So I weld up all sorts of things for the boats, like solar tracker brackets and stove mounting brackets, chain plate, reinforcement.
Ever-changing cloud formations and variable winds characterize our days entering Panamanian latitudes. Lucas observes a dolphin breaking the surface for air, an occurrence we have become familiar with by now, but remain entranced as if it were our first sighting. We are now within the many coastal islands of Panama, and we have also learned to share the waters with Titanic freighter vessels, or at least stay the hell out of their hull-crushing pathways. Dense jungle canopy grows over the many zigzag coastlines and islets of this frontier, foretelling its rich naval history. Lucas and I share moments of anticipation after 12 days at sea. I'm rewarded by a signature unique sunset to close out our last day at sea. We find safe anchorage in Islas Secas, a small biodiversive island group known for its docile marine life found here. Anchored in 15 feet, Valhalla and crew enjoy her protected waters. We explore the reefs and soak up the natural beauty. I rejoice inside knowing that we have made it to Panama. My friend Lucas, no doubt, has a similar feeling on reaching safe harbor. Our circumnavigation gone from dream to reality with the completion of leg 1.
This is another Allberg 30. This is what I call a Voyager edition, a boat that I've completely gone through and modified for offshore voyaging, and completely got it upgraded and fit out with new chain plates, new sails, new rigging, new tanks, outboard well conversion, all the rest. And the owner contacted me when he had first bought the boat in Chesapeake Bay and asked me to bring it home and refit it for him, and now he's living aboard down here. We've got the anchor windlass, new roller furling, new forward hatch, all new port lights, deadlights. Hi, Guy. How you doing?
Good. James' clients, young and old, both well-funded and shoestring sailors alike, are like a family. With his work and guidance, the boats and perhaps even some of their owners are transformed. He uses his tools to create a greater tool, a sailing voyager,
one that inspires us to dream big, to break free from our walled-in situations, to ignore the naysayers. James' life example strikes deep to the heart of the restless traveler. To inspire change from one generation to the next. His story and mine are about the way we sailors communicate by storytelling and word of mouth. It is an education passed on from one willing and curious seeker to the next. As James puts it in his book,
I hope your own life contains an epic voyage, and that you affirm the voice within, telling you that you mustn't wait until you are dying to discover you should start living.
I